Welcome to Better Together, Session 3. We had a little difficulty with the audio at the beginning of the video, so I'm doing a bit of a voiceover here. So I may not be synced with what you're seeing. So the big question in this session is, why do we fight the way that we fight? So it might not just be random. Perhaps there are patterns in the way that people respond when they enter into conflict. And so we're going to explore that question together. So what makes us fight? Why do each of us handle conflict in the way that we do? There may be patterns in our behavior. So perhaps it's based on things such as what has shaped our beliefs about arguments and disagreements in the past, our family background, our personality, but there may be underlying things that are going on as we enter into conflict. I think very often it is driven by deeply held core beliefs and things that we might have. So we might ask ourselves then, what is our own personal conflict style? And then how well does it align or clash with the conflict style of our partner? So we may have the same conflict style, or we may have different conflict styles. And depending on how that works out, it's going to create differences in the way that we approach conflict together. And of course, probably we've never thought of this before. These are probably new ideas. We've never thought, oh, I have a particular style of conflict. My partner has a particular style. And once we understand how these styles work, we may be able to recognize our own style and the style of our partner, and this will lead to much greater understanding. So right now I'm going to read you a story about George and Fran. Maybe it would help if I turned the microphone on. And they live in Kansas City. They're professionals. What do they love? Surprisingly, they love football, film, and food. And outside of work, they love to attend Chiefs games, go to movies, and try out new restaurants. Does it sound like anyone you know? Recently, they even took a couple's cooking class, and they had a wonderful time. When they're engaged in shared activities, everything goes well, and it's very seamless and effortless. But when a conflict arises, their dynamic shifts drastically. Fran has a tendency to raise her voice when she's frustrated, or even just try to make a point. And this often overwhelms George, who shuts down emotionally, becomes silent, or abruptly walks out of the room in mid-conversation. Fran is left stunned and hurt, and she interprets George's behavior as withdrawal and is cold, selfish, and uncaring. She feels rejected. George, on the other hand, feels hopeless. Trying to communicate with Fran seems futile, no matter what he says. It seems to lead to more yelling. Every disagreement feels like being trapped in a room with no exits. For Fran and George, there isn't one specific issue driving their conflict. Their recent arguments have ranged from minor choices like where we eat dinner to major life decisions such as whether they can afford to have a child. The problem isn't the content of their fights, it's how they fight. the growing disconnection between them stems from a fundamental, often unexamined difference in how each of them approaches conflict. They have contrasting conflict styles, and those differences are driving a wedge between them, even though they love each other and want to make the relationship work. So very often, in 200 couple interviews getting ready for marriage, they'll say, we have fights about seemingly small issues. And I go, yes, you do. But we don't know why we're upset. What's going on? Maybe there's something else going on, and it's not about the car, the dog, the flipper, whatever you think you're arguing about. Maybe there's something else, and it has to do with something called conflict styles. So, oh, that was exciting. In his extensive research, Gottman came up with, big reveal, actually 5 conflict styles, but only 3 of them are healthy. So we're going to spend our time on 3 of them, and we'll just kind of mention those others at some point. But the main styles are conflict avoiding, conflict validating, and conflict volatile. And we're going to look at each of these in quite a bit of detail here as we go through this. So what's conflict avoiding? Basically, assuming they're both the same, the couples tend not to have conflict discussions at all. They prefer to agree to disagree. They keep peace rather than get mired in potentially upsetting conversation. So I've met couples that have told me, oh, no, we've never had a fight. We never have a disagreement. Maybe this is their style, all right? Then validators, of course, they're not always in conflict, but when they do go into conflict, they fight politely. They discuss issues collaboratively, and they're interested in finding a compromise. So that's another style. And I will mention that the compromise will sometimes have varying success, all right? Then volatile couples are the most mysterious, all right? These are couples that regularly erupt into loud conflicts. Like they get at it. They're yelling at each other and just boo, 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 really loudly. And frequently they burn hotter than the sun. They're just like, if you lived next door to them, they would not be good neighbors, all right? I remember in my teenage years traveling to Greece. This is all I heard when I listened to them, the couples talking. It was like, whoa, 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 right back at you. And I was like, wow. So it's generally very intense and dramatic. Now, you might make some predictions right away. What's going to lead to happiness? But you might be surprised. So if we look more detailed at conflict avoidant, they try to steer clear of any conflict. They basically think there's no point. Why should we argue about it? Well, let's just agree to disagree and leave it alone and talk about something else, okay? It doesn't work for me, but somebody might be that way. They usually emphasize positive aspects of their relationship. That's good. But they prefer not to raise concerns that would disrupt the sense of balance and stability they have established. Okay, one style. And as it turns out, they kind of branch off into 2 distinct categories, 2 different groups, all right? The first type rarely, if ever, talk about any disagreement whatsoever. And when Gottman would get a couple like this into his lab, and he would specifically say, I want you to think about a conflict you've had recently in your marriage, and for the next 10 minutes, I want you to talk about it. They would sit there and stare at him. He said they had to send psychologists in to prompt them. They just like, I don't know, what should we talk about? Do you know what we should talk about? Have we had a conflict? No idea. All right? So even when asked to remember conflict, they can't do it. Now, Typically, this kind of couple would observe more defined, often traditional gender type roles. And mysteriously, they even had different territory. So maybe if it was very traditional, the wife was the queen of the kitchen and the guy is the queen of the garage and the tool shop, and he spent most of his time in the garage and she spent most of her time in the kitchen, and in the living room they hid behind their newspapers. This is a long time ago, I suppose. What's a newspaper? Anybody know? But that's what it looked like. All right? Now, is this good? Well, there's not a lot of conflict going on, but there are dangers, especially with this first group. It means they never deal with any underlying tension. What if something is wrong? What if they do need to discuss something? They have no experience and no tools to ever discuss it, all right? And so what happens is all these unaddressed issues are kind of like smoke in the room. It's just hanging there and they never deal with it, all right? And the risk is the couple then can become isolated, lonely, and especially if they're low risk takers, this could actually be the kind of couple that could experience that other divorce window that I was talking about. They drift apart, they lose contact, become super lonely, and end up separating, okay? So on the one hand, it looks good. On the other hand, it looks bad. Now, there's two types, though. In the second type, they spend a lot of time together. They discuss feelings. They maintain interest in one another, but they still avoid resolving disagreements. So the same thing, they never solve any disagreements, but they seem to be good friends. They seem to connect with each other very well emotionally, and when differences arise, they usually just move on. Well, let's not talk about that, okay? And despite having this weakness, believe it or not, Gottman found that this was the happiest group of couples in the lab. So avoidant plus avoidant, if they were in the category where they really genuinely, spent time together, shared feelings, common activities, lived that kind of life, could be a very happy marriage. In this particular type, they're less bound by gender roles. They share responsibilities. They do struggle to accept influence from each other. So remember that famous data point that came back. Husbands who allow themselves to be influenced by their wives have much happier marriages. It's not happening here. Okay, what about the validating couple? The validating couple, they kind of resemble the avoiders at first glance, but when there's a disagreement, they don't hide from it. They actually get involved. They get right in there and talk about it. So, you really don't like it when I do this, this, and this, and they'll talk about it, okay? And so that's positive. They're open to discussing their differences. They're open to exchanging perspectives, seeking compromise. Unlike the avoiders, they do aim to influence one another, and they'll accept each other's influence. And they work very collaboratively to solve problems. In fact, they're problem solvers. That's what they want to do. Well, we got a problem here. What are we going to do about it? What solution can we come up with? So all this sounds good. During conflict, they tend to remain fairly calm. They do value mutual understanding. Rather than just settling for agree to disagree, they're motivated to find a resolution, move forward, strive for progress. They won't leave issues unresolved. So all this sounds good. When they do have an intense conflict, they'll express emotion, and sometimes that emotion might get a little heated and out of control. But in the midst of that, it usually leads to some kind of compromise. And if they cannot compromise initially, then, well-trained children, they take turns, and they'll say things like, well, you won last time, so, you know, I'll do this or that. So, if they get stuck in some kind of gridlock, A, B, A, B, A stupid, no, B, B stupid, they can't get out of it. The compromise might just be, well, this time, let's do A. Well, last time you did A, now it's time for B, whatever. So they're good at conceding when they get stuck. Sometimes, however, they can still run into problems. Sometimes if the emotions run very high, things can escalate, and maybe they're not on their best behavior, and things get a little out of control. But by nature, they don't want that to happen, and so kind of instinctively they would try to take breaks. Okay, why don't we take a break and try talking about this later? So, sounds good. And instinctively, they just avoid being volatile. They just like, no, we can't be like that. I don't want to be volatile, okay? And try to shift all the gears to positive interactions. They know how to summarize their partner's intentions. So, for example, so instead of making last-minute plans with my parents, you would like me to plan ahead. So they're able to hear the other person say something and go back to them in an understanding kind of way. Having heard what you heard so far, we might assume that this is the best kind of couple, They sound great. Everything's wonderful. They seem to be doing it. Sometimes, in order to avoid any volatility and to keep the peace, they will give in to each other and make compromises before they've really heard each other out. So remember when we were talking about gridlock, we were talking about trying to figure out what is the underlying emotion or need that's driving what the other person is saying. Well, if we try to compromise too soon, we haven't got full understanding. We're giving in order to solve it, but we don't really know why they're passionate about A. In our head, we're still thinking, well, A's stupid, but I'm giving in, so yes, let's do A. So they don't do the work of going deeper before they compromise to figure out what's driving this, and that understanding would be immensely helpful to avoiding conflict in the future and a much deeper, more loving understanding of their partner. So Gottman's favorite question to validators is, are you giving up too much to keep peace? So you want to keep peace and you're really trying to compromise here, but are there things that you really value that you're giving up simply to keep peace? So in a certain sense, there's an edge here that's kind of like the avoiders. You're avoiding the problem by giving in too soon. So it's not perfect. Is there room for emotion and exploration in your fights? All right? So that's what could go wrong. Now, what about the volatile couples? When Gottman began 40 years ago, when a couple like this showed up, they were just like, oh, there's no way. This is bad. There's just no rescuing this. It's obviously bad. And they had a couple, they named them the Duke and Princess of Windsor. And they would just wind up and, nuclear destruction would go off. And these guys, they would watch them and film them and watch them and film them. And what was really interesting is it wasn't what it seemed. Okay? So, yes, they were very, very animated. My wife was talking about a couple that we mutually know. They're French-Canadian. And, oh my gosh, when they would get into it, it was just, But, I don't know how many kids they have. 8 kids. They've been married 40 years. It's a great marriage, okay? It's just their style. It might be cultural, I don't know, but it's their style. And so anyways, let's look at this. They're highly expressive. They're very comfortable showing strong emotion. Their conflicts often quickly escalate into intense, passionate debates, but usually filled with raised voices, but also with bursts of humor and with affection. So they're able to almost see it like it's a game. Okay, we're going to go at it here. Let's see who can win. But it's a playful, loud kind of way of going at it, all right? And believe it or not, this works, okay? This is a healthy style if this is what's going on. So unlike the avoidant couples, they're not afraid to share their feelings or get into it. They'll challenge each other frequently about shared responsibilities, relationship roles. They're feisty, okay? They're just plain feisty. It can appear very combative, but for them, arguing is a form of connection and engagement. So if they stop doing this, they would feel disconnected. They would not feel loved. So if you're not one of these people, you're shaking your head like, this would never work for me. No, this would never work. But for these people with this particular style, this is how they do it. And to them, it's not really a conflict. It is a conflict sometimes, but it's not really a conflict. It's actually how they stay emotionally engaged, okay? And there's actually brain chemistry to this. It would never, ever work for me. But if you have a conflict and you work through the conflict and then you feel like you've connected emotionally, what happens in your brain is your brain releases, along with 5 other hormones, just in case there's a nurse here, your brain releases dopamine. And dopamine is a happy hormone, and it's also kind of a hormone of connection. And what we often associate with that release of dopamine is a feeling of being romantic. So these volatile people could fight, kiss and make up, and then feel romantic, okay? If you're not volatile, don't try this at home. It will not work, okay? But anyways, now it can go wrong, as you might imagine, if they get too heated, if the argument gets out of control, and they lose the sense of humor and warmth, then the conflict becomes very negative and aggressive, and sometimes it spirals into a kind of arms race. So it doesn't always stay in control, and in this happy place, it can go bad, but then so can all the other styles, right, in various ways. Oop, I did it again. So sometimes it does go too hard, and there's a sense of emotional flooding. They feel overwhelmed, and they would say that they got out of control. So which conflict style is best? So you would have made guesses, probably. Maybe you would have said volatile or validating is the best. When comparing all these styles over 40 years of research, they began with the assumption that validating was the best and volatile or avoidant were bad. Believe it or not, and this was the prevailing view of couples therapy, so if I used an older inventory, they'd be like scoring you low if you were different. But is it really the case? Gottman says it's not. There is no best conflict style, and it isn't true that validators are the best. According to his data, any of these 3 styles has an equal shot at being the masters of love if, a very important if you maintain the 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions in conflict. So as long as there is an abundance of positive and you're avoiding the four horsemen, and they're not building up and overwhelming things, any one of these styles can be, he would consider them healthy, all right? And so even if at the moment or in a particular moment you recognize things aren't feeling well, it's very easy to turn this around and work on the positive interactions that you want to bring things back in line, and you don't have to feel bad if you're any one of these styles. Now, interesting experiment. When Dr. Gottman did his original research, he did it with Dr. John Levinson. I don't know why it's not the Levinson Institute, but it isn't. And so Levinson did something kind of fun. There is a science museum in San Francisco, and he built an exhibit for them where he put, I forget how many videos, but let's say 30 different videos. Each of the videos had, I think, a 10-minute segment of a couple having a conflict. The truth, which nobody knew, was 50% of those videos ended in divorce, and 50% continued to be married for 40 years. They put them on display, and then they asked people, it was an interactive exhibit, watch the videos and predict. What do you think is going to happen? Well, the average person, even counselors and therapists, researchers, the couples, different couples, nobody could predict. They weren't any better than a coin toss watching these videos. There was one group, however, actually two groups, that were accurate predictors. One was very newly married couples, and the other was very newly divorced couples. For some reason, both of those subgroups were somehow sensitive to the 5-to-1 ratio. So they kind of had a radar for picking up on, is that, the right thing. Now, Gottman's AI program could run those videos through and be 90% accurate, all right? So what does this mean? It means we want to keep the positive. And so I gave you a little handout there, something about positivity. But here's some positive things that we can do in conflict: an apology, a smile, a nod, emphasizing a reassuring touch, validating something your partner said, emphasizing what you and your partner have in common, owning responsibility for your part of the problem, saying things like good point, fair point, fair enough, pointing out what you both do right, recalling past success in conflict, and making a joke or laughing, all right? So just a little reminder of things that you can do that add some positives to the mix. So how do we stay in tune then with the 5-to-1 ratio? So we don't have his AI. In the conflict, should you take out a little notepad and keep score? Oh, positive, oh, negative, oh, positive, oh, negative. He says, absolutely not. That's dumb. And it would never work. First of all, you probably wouldn't do it right. And secondly, then you wouldn't be engaged with the other person, all right? So he just says, look, how does it feel? Does it feel like you're going the right way, or are you starting to go, oh, this doesn't feel good. I'm not liking where this is going. So we just honestly have probably got a compass for whether we're going the right direction or not. And he says, in the midst of it, even if you are feeling upset about an issue, do you feel like the other person heard you? Are you feeling understood? Are you feeling heard? In the midst of it, have there been moments of relief or a feeling of understood? Is the conversation including any humor or lightness? So remembering, again, we talked about this before, unfortunately, our brain codes the negative much more heavily than it does the positive. So every time there's a negative, it takes 5 positives to erase that, all right? So because it's more sensitive, a 1-to-1 ratio is a disaster. Okay, we cannot have positive, negative, positive, negative. We need to shut it down, take a break, come back, try to rebuild the positive, and then work on it again. Okay, so what about the 5-to-1 ratio in relation to these different kinds of couples? Well, if you had a conflict avoidant couple, you might think in real life, hey, they're rocking it. They never have conflict. So they might have a 10-to-1, they might have a 5-to-1 ratio, even in the midst of conflict. But is that good? Well, no visible negativity, but it's still not good because they're still avoiding any tough conversations, all right? They're still avoiding ever dealing with any problems, and that's not good. And by sidestepping the conflict, it can lead to problems down the road. So here's what he has in mind. What happens when there's a crisis? So you're going along, you're an avoidant couple, you never have any conflict, and then something big happens. Maybe a major loss of employment, a financial backslide of something, a death in the family, a serious illness, some big crisis hits you. What happens then? Well, basically, you may have spent 20 years together, but you have no skills whatsoever for dealing with a real crisis. You've never practiced. You have no idea, right? So when forced into conflict, it could go one of two ways. Remember, we said there were two types of couples. The ones that were able to maintain the 5-to-1 ratio and discuss what to do in the crisis actually became even happier. So maybe they did face a crisis, but this is the type of avoidant couple that spends time together, shares feelings, even though they never deal with problems. They actually got better in the crisis, but the ones who did not maintain the ratio, they became distant and disconnected. All right? The same thing happens, by the way, with people's faith. If you go through a crisis and you have Jesus in the boat and your faith is strong, the crisis will be difficult, let's be honest, but by the end of it, your faith will be even stronger. But if all your friends are on bar stools and you don't practice your faith and you go through a crisis, very often you end up even further away from your faith. And it's the same kind of principle in friendship with Jesus, really. Okay, so the crisis can expose hidden weaknesses, and we get the picture. Okay, validating couples, 5-to-1 ratio. They need to ensure that expressions of love and support and warmth continue to outweigh the inevitable stress and negativity that come in the conflict. So the danger of validators is, I guess they're always trying to fix something. They're in a hurry to solve it. What can we do to solve this? They're not in as big a hurry to slow down and say, so how are you feeling? How's this making you feel? And so that could be a little bit of a danger. Disagreements can serve a meaningful purpose, lead to growth, but the journey isn't always smooth. They tend to stay calm and logical by nature and focused on solutions, but they may overlook the importance of keeping a positive tone. Okay. There's a lot of content here. I don't want to spend too much time. So, volatile couples. Oh my gosh, how are we going to rescue them? So he says right off the bat, they need to maintain a lot of positivity to keep the scale tipped in the right direction. So perhaps of all these couples, well, is that true? Maybe. Of all the couples, they would need to be working on the positivity more. One thing that is very dangerous for them would be humor. at one time worked in a very dysfunctional workplace. I'm not even sure that one of my colleagues didn't have the dark triad. But he would say horrible things to me, and then I would confront him, and he would say, "Oh, I was only joking." Okay? No. If you say something really nasty to someone, and then you say you're joking, it's still something really nasty. You can't say that, right? So humor, if it becomes sarcastic and mean-spirited, it stops contributing to the positive dynamics. We got to watch out for that. In contempt can easily creep in under the guise of a joke. So if I had known about emotionally coding responses at the time, I would have immediately said, no, that joke is contempt. I would have picked that up right away. For volatiles, it's important to recognize when humor shifts from playful to harmful. So a good conversation for them might be, you know, we tease each other a lot, but when I tease you, do I ever hurt your feelings? Have I ever hurt your feelings with teasing? And if you did the little free inventory that I sent out there, some people did it, it has there's a layer in that where they ask that question, you know, about different uses of humor and whether it might cause that. Okay, 2 final conflict styles. These are bad, bad, and badder, okay? This is not good at all. So based on his research, he said, if you had these styles, you can never be successful. I would say that most likely, if you witness these styles, there's probably mental health issues going on, okay? There's something seriously wrong, because most of us don't behave this way, but there are some people out there like this, all right? Hostile couples can resemble validators, calm, restrained, but they're not overly expressive, especially if they're narcissists. They tend to work together, but they're defensive and rigid. They keep repeating their own point of view without showing any curiosity, listening, or seeking solutions. Their communication is filled with blame, using phrases like, you always, you never. Now, let's be honest, we all do that from time to time, right? I just said always. But we do sometimes use those words. And because of that, Wendy and I tried to make a rule that when we're in any kind of conflict, we can't say those words. You always, you never. We'll stop each other and say, I probably did that, but I don't always do that. You're not allowed to say always or never, okay? But this would be frequent. There's lots of contempt and criticism, so lots and lots of the 4 horsemen. This is just really bad. And like I said, I think this would be, you know, like 5% of the population, and probably with serious mental health things going on. Okay, so regardless of where you are on the healthy style of the spectrum, there can be a mix. So later, when I give you the little survey, you may find I'm mostly this, but actually I think I might be a bit of this as well. So you might not be purely one or the other. So we'll have to think about that. But the main thing is, as long as we're on the healthy side of this, everything we talked about in the very first session we had together about ways to build the positive, and I've kind of repeated some of those, and I gave you that sheet today. As long as we're continuing to build that, things will go better and it'll feel good. And we can even measure it as we're going along. So, you know, we step out and make a mistake and we criticize and it didn't go well. We can try to repair that. You know, I'm sorry, that really was a bad time to bring that up, and I don't think I should have brought it up that way. I apologize for that. We can see how we feel and try to operate. In all of the conflict stuff, one of the themes for Gottman that I haven't highlighted very much is the issue of repair. So when you have conflict, it's really good, once you've calmed down, to examine what went wrong in the conflict and try to figure out how to do it better next time. How did we end up hurting each other's feelings? And we can start with ourselves. What did I do wrong? And if we apologize to the other person, ask their forgiveness, and be vulnerable about what we did wrong, it's very likely they'll repeat and do the same thing back to us. And that is real growth in relationship. If we can review what happened and try to fix it, we will prevent a future escalation, and we'll develop new skills, and more importantly, we'll probably grow deeper in love with each other because we're getting to know each other better. Okay, so ultimately, you can survive with any three of these styles, be happy, successful, as long as you keep the math in mind, all right? So, now, so far we talked about taking these styles and matching them up with the same thing. So, 2 avoidance, 2 validators. What happens, and this frequently happens, if 2 people have different styles? How's that going to work? So let's look at this. If we go back to that Fran and George story that I read at the beginning, they have mismatched styles. Okay, so if we slow it down a bit and you think about yourself for a moment, so maybe you're asking yourself, I wonder what conflict style I have. How do I like to express emotion? How do I like to deal with emotion? How do I think other people should deal with their emotion? If you're a very calm, logical person and the other person's flapping all over the place, can you show respect to that person if that's their style? Or do you look down on them like, get it under control, So anyway, so what about Fran and George? So in analyzing this, Gottman's going to talk about something he calls meta-emotion. And we don't have to know what that means, other than it means how we feel about feelings. So when it comes to feelings, what's your point of view? What's your approach to life in regard to feelings? Are you a feelings person? Are you a more logical person? Do you hate feelings? Do you love feelings? But how do you feel about feelings? When couples are not aligned in their conflict style, they often have fundamentally different views or beliefs about how emotions should be expressed. Have you ever thought about that? I had a job where I was managing other people, and when I look back now and I think, who did I have conflict with? It was probably someone who had a different approach to feelings. I wanted them to feel this way, and they were doing something different, and I was kind of judging them, for how they were acting. And it could go, right across the spectrum. Okay, George tends to shut down or stonewall during intense arguments, and he believes negative emotion should be avoided. So what is he? He's avoidant, all right? The other one, Fran, feels rejected and hurt when George withdraws and believes these emotions should be openly expressed and worked out. So she wants to talk about it and loudly, and he wants to not talk about it at all, okay? And you can just see what's going to happen when they go into conflict. So volatiles are looking for passion. They want their partner to become vulnerable. They want to do it right now, Spill. Tell me about this. Let's talk. In the middle of a crowded street with all the other people listening, and the other person's like, no, okay. So the avoider paired with a volatile, ouch. This is exactly what the avoider is avoiding. They prefer not to talk about things. They like to keep distance from conflict, and it creates a clear mismatch. A classic case of avoider paired with a volatile. To volatiles like Fran, avoiders come across as emotionally distant and indifferent. They're sending the message, this isn't worth my energy. Okay, when they were filming this in the lab, when the guy would shut down and start stonewalling, the camera would shift to usually the wife. By the way, 85% of the time, stonewallers are men. It would shift to the wife, and her emotional energy was just going up and up and up. She's getting mad, like, I asked you a question. Why aren't you answering me? So that's what would happen in this case. So volatiles crave emotional engagement and intensity. Now, what about an avoidant with a validator? With this one, it's not likely to cause major issues on surface because their emotional styles are pretty compatible when it comes to how they handle feelings or feelings about feelings. Avoiders and validators overlap in terms of approach to conflict. There's some awareness of each other's styles and history with conflict. If they know, like, okay, the validator wants to solve things, the avoidant, doesn't really want to deal with it at all, but is probably willing to be cooperative as long as it's the right situation. You can see how this would work. What about a validator with a volatile? The validator can soon feel overwhelmed or emotionally flooded by the volatile's intense, high-energy approach to conflict. So even though the validator is really good at problem solving and wants to cooperate and is looking for solutions, they're drinking from a fire hose. Okay, they just, what do I do? This is just too intense. Okay, so the volatile ends up feeling unheard, dismissed. This may trigger them to even push harder. Okay, you're not listening. I'm going to raise my voice. Okay, and they could then slip into contempt and some negative behavior. Also, this kind of relationship can intensify over time. It could get worse. When the volatile consistently feels unheard, they can become more hostile and negative. Maybe they'll get sarcastic, and maybe there's no forgiveness happening, and so there's a lot of, that's the third time this week, and resentment is building. So you can see how this would go wrong. The validator, even though they're normally someone who's quite willing to engage, they could end up withdrawing, and they might even become kind of avoidant, looking like an avoidant. So eventually, if this got really bad, communication breaks down completely. Neither partner is truly connecting. If the cycle continues, you end up with growing contempt and stonewalling, and you get it. Okay? So the volatile avoidant mismatch, to be perfectly honest, he says, is the toughest. So if you were, oh, sorry, I skipped one. That was avoidant. Avoidant volatile is the worst. All right? So basically you have someone who roars like a lion and someone who wants to be a bunny. And the lion and the bunny, not working too well. Okay? Opposites attract, so sometimes these couples do end up getting together. The avoidant is attracted to the volatile's lively, dynamic energy. So let's face it, the volatiles are big personalities, okay? Like, they should be on stage. They're loud and, they're funny and they're, so you can see the attraction. But I would imagine a lot of avoidance would be more introverted personalities. Whew. Okay, hard to keep up with that act. Volatile, avoidant. So very often the differences become very problematic. They struggle to communicate and understand each other's emotional language. Oh, it went off the screen. The pairing often ends quickly with a high rate of separation. So couples with this couple pairing would often, they may not even get married, but it would be a difficult kind of connection. Okay, now you're probably curious what your style is. Now, I'm kind of proud of this. I took the Gottman stuff, and with a little help from a chatty friend, I made an inventory where you can go through a series of questions and score yourself, and then try to figure out what your conflict style might be. And I tried to cleverly put 2 copies face down in front of you on the table. So if you can reach across the table, hopefully you'll each find that page. And basically, the inventory asks you a question, and you say yes or no. And when I first put it together, it was really obvious, like it had the heading, and then there'd be like 7 or 8 questions under each of the styles. And I didn't want to risk you being biased and already thinking you know what your style is. So I mixed them all up. So it's a random set of questions. And just read the question on your own, go down the page, yes, no, down the page. And then when you're done, I'm going to give you a scoring sheet. And if you're joining us on the video at home, this is the point where you email Deacon Scott and say, could I please have the interview that you were doing in the class? And I will email it to you. Uh-oh. When you're upset, do you tend to blame my chatty friend. When you're upset, do you tend to keep it to yourself or wait for it to blow over? Are you upset? I think that works, but I don't know if I'm smarter than my chatty friend. No peeking at my chart here. This is the answers. There's no right answers. It's just your opinion about yourself. Giving answer sheets to blank tables. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to repeat that question because I've been asked it twice. What if you get a question and you don't like the question and you just don't know which way to go? Sometimes. So that very frequently happens on any little psychological inventory. And a psychologist told me to do this. Say, I hate the question, but 51% jump off the fence one way or the other. So you got to choose yes or no and just jump. And it won't be perfect, but you're just giving your instinct on it. I think it's kind of half and half, but it's a little bit more this way, just so you answer it. Okay? And this is a very imprecise, imperfect instrument that has not been tested by any scientist. So when we're done, you can say, yeah, but I disagree with this. At the same time, I hope it was fun. Hopefully the answer key is self-explanatory, but you basically just count up the yeses under each category. So for each category, avoidant, validating, volatile, it tells you what numbers they are, but I also color-coded it. Just count up how many yeses under each category. And if you were clearly one of those styles, you should have more yeses under one category. You could be a hybrid, so you might find yourself, well, we've never done this before. Let's get 200 people to write this and see what happens. And the fun thing is, I didn't even take it myself, so I have to go away and do it myself and see what I think.